You are sitting in the silence they engineered, waiting for the apology they will never give, all while they sit back, watching their phone, expecting you to eventually crawl back and beg for their crumbs. But here is the truth you need to hear. Your silence is not an absence of love. It is the presence of your own self-respect. When you finally decide not to beg, you aren't just ending an argument. You are systematically dismantling the very foundation of their power over you. Welcome back. Today, we are talking about the moment the mask slips, not on them, but on you. We are looking at the psychology of the waiting game. Why do they put you in that position? And more importantly, why is your refusal to play along the most dangerous thing you can do to their ego? This isn't just about conflict, it's about the anatomy of liberation. The weaponization of waiting is a central feature of the narcissistic dynamic, serving as a tactical maneuver to enforce dependency and ensure that you remain tethered to their whims. By employing silent treatments, intermittent reinforcement, or calculated withdrawals of affection, the narcissist deliberately constructs a void of uncertainty. This waiting period is not an accidental lull in communication, but a manufactured crisis designed to trigger your attachment anxiety. They understand that by removing their presence, or the validation you have become accustomed to, they can force you into a state of hypervigilance where your primary objective becomes the restoration of the relationship at any cost. When you are trapped in this cycle, the passage of time becomes an instrument of psychological coercion. The narcissist observes your reaction from a distance, measuring the degree of your distress against the intensity of their coldness. They wait for the moment your internal discomfort overrides your logical boundaries, anticipating that the fear of permanent abandonment will eventually drive you to initiate contact, apologize for grievances you did not commit, or offer concessions simply to end the silence. By making you wait, they place the burden of fixing the dynamic entirely on your shoulders, effectively absolving themselves of accountability for the original conflict. Crucially, this tactic is intended to condition you to associate their return with relief, thereby deepening the trauma bond. Every time you beg to end the waiting period, you implicitly validate their power to determine the terms of your emotional landscape. They treat the relationship like a faucet that can be turned off and on, expecting you to remain poised and ready to grasp for their attention the second it is offered. Recognizing this pattern is the first step toward dismantling it. Once you understand that the silence is a weapon rather than a reflection of your worth, you can begin to transform that waiting room into a space of reflection, independence, and eventual liberation from their control. The ego validation loop functions as the primary engine of a narcissistic relationship, operating on the premise that your submissiveness is the ultimate proof of their significance. Narcissists often struggle with a fragile core identity that requires constant external reinforcement to maintain a sense of superiority and control. When they orchestrate a situation, such as a conflict or a withdrawal, they are essentially setting a trap designed to elicit a specific emotional response from you. They need you to beg because, in their distorted reality, your pursuit of them serves as an objective measurement of their value. If you are willing to debase yourself, apologize for their mistakes, or plead for their return, they interpret this as confirmation that they are the prize and that you are hopelessly dependent on their favor. This loop relies heavily on the destruction of your objective reality. By forcing you to beg, the narcissist creates a power imbalance where your self-worth becomes inextricably linked to their permission to be in their good graces. They are not looking for a resolution to a conflict or a healthy exchange of emotions. They are looking for a performance of loyalty. The act of begging satisfies their need for control because it forces you to prioritize their fragile ego over your own dignity. It provides them with an immediate hit of narcissistic supply, reinforcing the belief that they can manipulate your emotions at will. When you eventually reach the point where you refuse to enter this loop, you effectively starve them of the fuel they have come to rely on. By denying them the satisfaction of seeing you chase them, you signal that their opinion of you no longer dictates your internal stability. This breaks the cycle of validation they have weaponized, forcing them to confront the reality that their influence over you is no longer absolute, which is the most threatening outcome they can encounter. The disruption of the script occurs the moment you choose to deviate from the role the narcissist has meticulously assigned to you. In the theater of their psychological world, you are expected to be the desperate partner, the one who initiates the peacemaking, and the one who accepts blame to avoid the agony of abandonment. When you refuse to beg, you effectively throw the script across the stage, shattering the predictable choreography of the power dynamic. This defiance acts as a profound rejection of their authority because it demonstrates that you are no longer operating within the framework of their manipulations or their manufactured expectations. By withholding the apology or the desperate plea they demand, you are signaling that your internal narrative is no longer anchored to their approval. The narcissist relies on the assumption that your fear of loss is greater than your commitment to your own truth. Therefore, your refusal to play your part renders their entire tactical strategy obsolete. They have no contingency plan for a partner who is indifferent to their silent treatments or their attempts at emotional extortion. This lack of compliance forces them into a state of psychological disorientation because their primary method of maintaining leverage, coercion through anxiety, has suddenly failed. When the expected reaction does not materialize, the control they once wielded begins to evaporate. You are essentially dismantling the psychological contract they wrote for you without your consent. This moment of disruption is not merely an act of stubbornness. It is a fundamental reclamation of autonomy that forces the narcissist to acknowledge that you are an independent agent rather than an extension of their ego. By refusing to follow their lead, you strip away the illusion of their omnipotence and reclaim the power that they have spent the entire duration of the relationship attempting to extract from your spirit. The narcissistic injury is perhaps the most volatile reaction you will encounter when you finally decline to play your part in their script. When you refuse to beg, you are not merely engaging in a silent standoff, you are delivering a direct, undeniable blow to the facade of their superiority. In the mind of a narcissist, the world is organized around their needs, and your willingness to chase them is an essential component of that order. When you withhold that validation, you are essentially telling them that they are not the center of your universe. To them, this is not just an inconvenience or a difference of opinion, it is a profound existential threat that reveals their deep-seated insecurities. Because they are fundamentally incapable of self-regulation, your indifference is perceived as an act of aggression. They view your refusal to beg as an injury because it denies them the primary fuel they require to feel stable and important. When they are confronted with this void, the response is rarely one of introspection or growth. Instead, it is almost always an escalation. They may cycle through various tactics, ranging from extreme coldness and calculated sabotage to sudden, intense bursts of rage or manipulative displays of victimhood. They are attempting to force a reaction out of you, hoping that if they push hard enough, you will eventually crack and return to the established dynamic of the needy pursuer. Understanding that this escalation is a byproduct of their injury, rather than a reflection of your failure, is critical. The intensity of their reaction is a testament to how much they rely on your compliance to maintain their own sense of self. By remaining detached and refusing to participate in the chaos they create to provoke you, you are effectively standing your ground against their need for dominance. This creates a moment of absolute clarity, where you finally see the desperation behind their control and realize that their behavior is a desperate attempt to regain power they have already lost. If you are currently standing your ground against these patterns, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below with the word firm. It helps us build a community of accountability and shows others that you aren't alone in this process. Detachment as self-preservation is the foundational step in reclaiming your identity from a relationship defined by manipulation and emotional exhaustion. When you realize that you are being coerced into a cycle of begging to soothe the narcissist's ego, choosing not to participate is not an act of malice or indifference toward the relationship itself. Instead, it is a deliberate and necessary decision to protect your mental health and emotional integrity. By refusing to engage in the demeaning process of pleading for validation, you are establishing a boundary that says your worth is not contingent upon their approval or their fluctuating moods. This process is deeply uncomfortable because it requires you to sit with the discomfort of silence and the grief of realizing that the connection you wanted does not exist in a healthy form. However, this discomfort is the crucible in which your autonomy is reforged. Detachment allows you to stop projecting your emotions onto a person who is incapable of reciprocating or respecting them. You begin to shift your focus from managing their volatile reactions to nurturing your own internal stability. It is a protective mechanism that stops the drain on your energy, preventing you from constantly sacrificing your peace for the sake of an artificial calm. When you detach, you are effectively pulling your emotional resources back into your own life, recognizing that you are the only one who can truly provide the validation you have been seeking from the wrong source. This form of self-preservation is an act of courage because it requires you to stand alone in the face of their attempts to guilt, shame, or manipulate you back into a position of subservience. It is the ultimate reclamation of your own life, moving your focus from their demands to your own peace. The power of the non-response is the ultimate antidote to the psychological games played by someone who thrives on your emotional feedback. Narcissists operate on the assumption that every action, every argument, every silence, and every attempt at manipulation will elicit a corresponding reaction from you. They are essentially fishermen casting out lines of conflict or neglect to see if you will bite, hoping to hook you into a cycle where they maintain total control over your emotional state. When you offer a non-response, you are effectively cutting the line. You are denying them the ego fuel they require to feel powerful, and in doing so, you render their entire tactical arsenal useless because a manipulator cannot manipulate someone who refuses to acknowledge the maneuver. Choosing not to respond is not merely a tactic of convenience. It is a profound boundary that communicates that your energy is no longer available for their games. By remaining silent, you are refusing to participate in their theater, which is deeply unsettling to a person who relies on your engagement to validate their existence. They interpret silence not as a lack of interest, but as a lack of access. And for a narcissist, the loss of access to your emotions is a terrifying prospect. They may try to provoke you further, escalating their behavior in an attempt to elicit even a shred of irritation or despair. But every time you stay calm and unresponsive, you are reinforcing the fact that you are no longer a participant in their dynamic. This discipline requires immense strength because it forces you to bypass your natural instinct to explain, defend, or protest. However, once you embrace the power of the non-response, you reclaim your internal peace and demonstrate that you are the sole authority over your reactions, leaving them to sit alone in the silence they once used to control you. Distinguishing between authentic grief and the compulsion to comply is the most difficult internal battle you will face when moving away from a narcissistic dynamic. It is entirely natural to mourn the loss of the relationship, the version of the person you believed they were, and the dreams you held for the future. This grief is profound and valid, and it often arrives as a heavy, aching void. However, the narcissist relies on you confusing this genuine heartbreak with an urgent, desperate need to fix the situation by begging for their favor. They count on your grief to act as a lever, assuming that your pain will eventually become so unbearable that you will sacrifice your boundaries just to alleviate the suffering, which inevitably returns you to their cycle of control. Learning to separate these two states requires radical honesty with yourself. When you feel the overwhelming urge to reach out or apologize, pause and ask whether you are truly seeking a healthy resolution or if you are simply trying to sedate the anxiety that they have instilled in you. If the drive to connect is rooted in the belief that you must appease them to earn back a sense of safety or worth, that is not healthy grief. It is an echo of trauma bonding. True grief is the process of accepting that the relationship was built on a foundation that could never support you, and that letting go is an act of mourning a reality that never truly existed. When you can honor your sadness without allowing it to dictate your actions, you break the tether that binds you to their manipulation. By sitting with your sorrow without acting on the impulse to surrender, you move through the pain toward genuine, lasting emotional liberation. The shift in power dynamics represents the final, transformative stage of your journey, marking the point where the narcissist realizes that their most potent weapon, coercion through anxiety, has been permanently disabled. Throughout the relationship, they operated under the assumption that they held the keys to your emotional well-being, believing that your fear of their withdrawal or their disapproval was a leash long enough to pull you back whenever they chose. By consistently refusing to beg, you have fundamentally altered the landscape of the connection. You have shown them that your stability is no longer something they can influence, manipulate, or revoke at their convenience. This creates a seismic shift because the narcissist cannot maintain a position of dominance over someone who is no longer afraid of their absence. Once this transition occurs, the dynamic between you changes irrevocably. The narcissist may experience a period of confusion or rage as they scramble to find new ways to regain leverage, but they will eventually recognize that the old tactics simply do not land anymore. You have moved from a place of reactive survival to a place of proactive self-governance. By no longer providing the desperate, submissive feedback they crave, you force them to face the reality that you are an independent person with boundaries that are not up for negotiation. This shift is not just about stopping the behavior. It is about rewriting the terms of your engagement. You are no longer a person waiting for permission to be happy or secure. You are a person who has reclaimed the authority to define your own value. When the power balance shifts in this way, the narcissist loses their ability to dictate the emotional climate, and you are finally free to walk away from their shadow and into the clarity of your own autonomy. The moment you stop begging is the moment you reclaim your soul from the architecture of their control. By refusing to chase them, you are not merely ending a conflict, you are fundamentally rejecting the premise that your value is something to be earned through submission. You have successfully unlearned the dangerous lesson that their silence is a reflection of your worth, and you have replaced it with the liberating truth that your dignity is non-negotiable. When you stay firm, you force the narcissist to confront the limits of their power. You move out of the reactive, fear-based space they engineered and into the quiet, steady strength of self-governance. This is not just a triumph over a toxic interaction. It is a profound declaration that you are no longer a participant in a game where you were designed to lose. As you step out of the shadows of their manipulation, remember that the silence you were once afraid of has become your greatest sanctuary. You are no longer waiting for them to recognize your worth because you have finally, definitively recognized it yourself. You are free, you are autonomous, and you are finally in command of your own narrative.